The radio cracked once, sharp and final, then went dead. I remember staring at the handset in my gloved palm, waiting for the voice to come back, already knowing it would not. The order I had just received was clear. Hold position. Do not move. Do not intervene. Lawful. Clean. The kind of order that looks perfect when written down and signed by someone far away. The fire changed before anyone said a word. The air thickened, like the oxygen had been pulled out of the clearing. Ash stopped drifting and started falling straight down, hot enough to sting my neck. I heard one of my soldiers curse quietly as gray flecks hit his visor and smeared, melting into dull streaks instead of bouncing off. The wind shifted hard and the sound followed it, a low roar rolling closer through the trees, not louder, just nearer. Downhill, through smoke and half-burned timber, I heard shouting, not commands. Not controlled, panic. The sound people make when they realize time is running out. My boots were locked into frozen dirt. Behind me, my squad stood silent. No one rushed me. No one argued. They were waiting to see who I would be in that moment. The officer trusted to obey, or the woman who could not pretend she did not hear what was happening below us. If I stepped forward, I would be disobeying a lawful order. If I stayed, I would be obeying it. I took one breath, then another, knowing whatever choice I made would not end when the fire did. I was a first lieutenant with the Army National Guard in the year 2011, deployed to a remote training region outside Camp Alder Ridge in northern Idaho. It was supposed to be a quiet rotation, domestic support, joint exercises, the kind of assignment that fills binders, not history books, no overseas combat zone, no enemy, nothing that would ever make the news. I was 27 years old, wearing the rank longer than I felt ready for, responsible for a mixed unit of infantry and engineers pulled from small towns scattered across the Midwest. Farmers, mechanics, a high school football coach who still ran drills on weekends. People who trusted me because the uniform told them they could. Our mission was to support a large-scale wildfire containment exercise alongside state responders and volunteer crews. On paper, it looked simple. Perimeter security, traffic control, logistics support. We guarded access roads, coordinated vehicle movement, and kept civilians out of danger zones. Unofficially, everyone understood this was a stress test, not of fire behavior, but of command. How leadership held together when the threat was unpredictable and authority was shared between agencies that did not speak the same language. By then, I had been in uniform for 9 years. I believed in the system. I believed orders existed to protect lives, not just careers. Authority mattered because chaos filled the gaps when it failed. I had seen what happened when discipline broke down, and I did not want that on my watch. The morning everything changed started like every other. Cold air that burned your lungs if you breathed too deep. Smoke hanging low enough to blur the tree line, but not thick enough to cause alarm. Radios were busy but steady, filled with routine check-ins and status reports. No urgency, just work. By mid-afternoon, the fire behavior shifted faster than predicted. The wind turned without warning. Heat built unevenly across the terrain. Containment lines that had held for hours failed almost at once. Civilian crews began repositioning in a hurry, engines revving harder than they had all day. You could feel it before anyone said it out loud. Control was slipping. That was when higher command issued a blanket hold order to all military elements in the area. No movement without direct authorization. At the time, it made sense. Pulling military units into unstable fire behavior without coordination could have made things worse. Holding position kept accountability clean and reduced risk. It was the kind of decision that looks responsible when viewed from a distance. So we held. We stayed on our assigned ground and waited for updates. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. Smoke thickened. Reports came in slower. Maps stopped matching what we could see with our own eyes. I told myself this was discipline. This was how the system worked. You wait. You trust that the chain above you sees more than you do. At that moment, I still believed it. The first real warning sign was the silence. One of the civilian radio channels went quiet without explanation. At first, it did not feel urgent. Radios fail in rough terrain. Batteries die, antennas snap. But then, another transmission broke apart mid-sentence, the voice dissolving into static that never cleared. After that, nothing at all. My platoon sergeant noticed it before I did. He did not challenge the hold order or suggest anything reckless. He just stepped closer and told me to listen. We stood side by side, counting the seconds between radio checks, both of us watching a section of forest we had been told not to worry about. The smoke there had thickened, no longer drifting but rolling low and heavy, hugging the ground as it moved. Intel updates started lagging behind reality. Situation reports described containment lines that no longer existed. The fire line marked secure on our map had already jumped twice, leaving blackened ground where safety was supposed to be. I requested clarification through proper channels, keeping my tone flat and professional. The response came back slow and procedural, like it was being read from a script. Maintain position. Assets unavailable. Stand by. Ash began falling heavier, sticking to skin and fabric. The air pressed harder against my chest with each breath. The wind shifted again, and with it came a low roar that felt closer than it should have been. Leaves curled in on themselves. A strip of caution tape snapped free and vanished into the smoke. Around me, my soldiers stayed disciplined. No one spoke out of turn. No one broke formation, but I could read the change in them easily. Helmets angled toward the smoke without anyone realizing they had turned their heads. Gloves tightened around straps. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. They were tracking the same signs I was. Heat rising in uneven waves, ash smearing across visors instead of bouncing off. The sound of engines in the distance that should have been moving closer but were not. I sent another request up the chain. This time there was a longer pause before anyone answered. When the reply came, it offered nothing new. Maintain position. Coordination ongoing. That answer might have worked earlier. It did not match what was unfolding now. A civilian liaison reached out on a private channel, his voice tight and controlled in a way that told me he was holding something back. He asked where we were positioned, how fast we could move. Questions he was not supposed to ask, questions I was not authorized to answer. I reminded him we were under a hold order. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. He said a volunteer crew had been cut off near an access road less than a kilometer from our position. He did not say they were trapped. He did not need to. I relayed the information up the chain immediately. I waited for direction. Seconds stretched into minutes. The response acknowledged the report and repeated the order. Stand by. I felt pressure closing in from both sides at once. Above me was a lawful order, clean and documented. Below me were people whose situation was changing faster than paperwork and radio traffic could keep up. My authority stopped at my platoon, but the consequences of my decision would reach far beyond it. For the first time since the hold order came down, I understood something clearly. Standing still was no longer neutral. As daylight faded, the situation grew unstable in ways that were harder to measure. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the smoke thickened just enough to distort distance. What had been tense earlier now felt brittle, like everything was one sharp movement away from breaking. The civilian liaison contacted me again, this time on a private channel he should not have been using. His voice was tight, clipped, controlled in the way people sound when they are trying not to let panic surface. He asked where we were positioned, how many vehicles we had, whether we could move quickly. They were questions he already knew I was not authorized to answer. The fact that he asked anyway told me something was failing on his end. I reminded him we were under a hold order. I said it carefully, the way officers are trained to speak when they want their words clean on a recording. There was a long pause, long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. When he came back, his voice was quieter, almost flat. He said a volunteer crew had been cut off near an access road just downhill from our position. A road we could reach in minutes if we moved now. He did not say they were trapped. He did not say they were dying. He said they might not have minutes. I ended the call and stood there with the radio still in my hand. Smoke burned my throat when I breathed too deep. Ash clung to everything. The cold in the ground pushed up through my boots even as the heat from the fire pressed in from the other side. The world felt out of balance. I called my squad leaders together. No raised voices, no speeches. Just the people who needed to hear it. We stepped a few paces away from the rest of the platoon, close enough to stay connected, far enough to keep the moment contained. I laid it out plainly. The hold order was still in effect. No movement without authorization. I told them about the broken civilian channel, the private call, the volunteer crew near the access road. I told them what we knew and what we did not. I told them the risk. Moving without authorization could put us directly in danger and would almost certainly trigger an investigation. Staying where we were could mean doing nothing while people ran out of time. No one interrupted me. No one argued. They listened, nodding slowly. One asked about terrain. Another asked about medical capability. Practical questions, not emotional ones. That told me they were already thinking about consequences, not fear. I told them what it could cost me. Formal review, relief of command. A mark that does not fade easily. I did not look for sympathy. I just said it out loud. There was a pause. Mark Dalton, the squad leader who coached high school football back home, reached down and tightened the strap on his pack. He did it slowly, deliberately, like finishing a routine he had done 1,000 times. He looked up at me and nodded once. "Ready when you are, Lieutenant." No argument. No advice. Just trust. That silence after he spoke carried more weight than any debate could have. I felt the full weight of command settle into my chest then. Not confidence, not pride. Responsibility. The understanding that whatever happened next would belong to me, no matter how it turned out. This was not about bravery. I did not feel brave. It was about recognizing that doing nothing was also a decision, and it carried its own cost. I looked back toward the slope where the access road disappeared into smoke and trees. The moment for choosing was closing fast. I made the call without raising my voice. There was no announcement to the platoon, no moment that felt dramatic enough to mark what we were about to do. I said we would move for reconnaissance only. No engagement, no deviation beyond visual confirmation. I chose my words carefully, the way officers do when they know every sentence might be replayed later. It was a narrow justification, thin enough to bend under scrutiny, and I knew it. No one reacted outwardly. That was the part that stayed with me. Helmets were adjusted, chin straps tightened. Gloves pulled snug, engines turned over one by one, low and controlled. We crossed the line quietly, fully aware that there was no crossing back. The hold order still existed. Nothing about it had changed except our willingness to obey it. Radios stayed short and disciplined. No unnecessary traffic, no commentary. Vehicles moved slow, deliberately, tires crunching over ash and gravel. Every few meters felt heavier than the last, like we were walking forward with something tugging at our backs. Every step felt like tearing a page out of a rule book I had trusted for most of my adult life. The terrain dropped fast as we moved downhill. Visibility narrowed almost immediately. Smoke rolled in uneven waves, sometimes clearing just long enough to give a false sense of space before closing again. The heat came and went with the wind, pressing against exposed skin, then pulling back just enough to remind us it could surge again without warning. I kept my eyes moving constantly. Tree line, slope angle, wind direction. The access road appeared where the map said it would, but the ground around it told a different story. Scorch marks crossed areas that were not marked as threatened. Burn patterns showed the fire had already behaved in ways the reports did not account for. We were not catching up to the situation. We were stepping into it blind. When we reached the ridge above the road, I saw them. At first, they did not register as people. Just dark shapes clustered together where the trees thinned. Then movement. A hand lifting and dropping again. Someone on their knees. Another lying flat, barely moving. Smoke streaked across their faces, turning skin the color of ash. Gear was scattered where it had been dropped in haste, no longer useful. They were civilians. Volunteer responders. Trapped between two advancing fire fronts, boxed in by terrain and wind that had shifted faster than anyone could outrun. Some were injured, burns along hands and necks. One man coughing so hard he could barely stay upright. Another clutching his chest, eyes wide, breathing shallow and fast. There was no time left for procedure. Recon ended the moment my eyes finished taking it in. I did not say it out loud, but everyone knew. Observation was no longer the mission. The access road below them was still passable, but only barely. Flames were creeping closer on one side, smoke thickening by the minute. The window was closing in real time. I keyed the radio and ordered an extraction. The words felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because I knew exactly what they meant for me. Light because there was no hesitation left. The decision had settled fully. Whatever consequences came later would come later. Right now, people needed to move. We moved fast without rushing. Vehicles repositioned to block heat and falling debris. Soldiers dismounted and ran forward, heads down, movements tight and efficient. No shouting. No panic. Hands reached out. Bodies were lifted. One woman stumbled and was caught before she fell. Another responder had to be half carried, arms slung over two shoulders, boots dragging through ash. I stayed close, counting heads, scanning constantly. Fire does not wait for you to finish your checklist. The wind shifted again, sending a wave of heat across the road that forced us to turn away and shield our faces. Sparks landed on sleeves and rolled off. One of my soldiers slapped at his arm and kept moving without breaking stride. We loaded civilians wherever we could. Seats, floors, any space that could hold them safely. Medical checks were quick and incomplete. There was no time for more. One of my medics met my eyes briefly and shook his head just enough for me to understand. The man with the chest pain was in serious trouble. We moved him anyway. As the last civilians were loaded, the fire surged again, flames crossing closer than before. The air felt like it was vibrating. I gave the order to pull back. As we moved uphill, I sent the report. I did not hide behind language. I stated clearly that I had moved my unit without authorization due to an immediate threat to civilian life. I included location, conditions, and status. The moment the transmission went out, I felt it, the weight of what I had done settling into place. We cleared the danger zone just as the fire closed in behind us. Flames crossed the road less than a minute after our last vehicle passed, sealing off the place we had been standing moments earlier. I watched it through a streaked side mirror, a hard line of orange cutting across the landscape. We stopped when it was safe enough to do so. Civilians were handed over to medical personnel arriving from another direction. One of them collapsed the moment he was transferred. Medics moved fast, voices calm, hands sure. I stepped back and let them work. Only then did my hands start to shake. I stood there, helmet off, sweat and ash streaking my face, radios lighting up with questions I was not ready to answer. I knew what was coming. Investigations. Statements. Consequences. I also knew, without any doubt, that I would make the same call again. Because when I looked back down that road, now fully consumed by fire, I understood something clearly. If we had waited, There would have been no one left to extract. Everything after that blurred into motion and noise, the kind that does not settle into clean memories. Heat surged without warning, then pulled back just long enough to make you doubt your instincts. The fire stopped behaving the way it was supposed to. It climbed, dropped, curled back on itself. The wind shifted mid-breath, turning safe ground into threat in seconds. Communication started to fracture almost immediately. Radios worked, then did not. Voices overlapped. Call signs stepped on each other. I remember shouting commands I hoped were right, my voice sounding distant in my own helmet. There was no time to second-guess wording or tone. You spoke once, clearly, and trusted that training would fill in the gaps. As we repositioned to clear the road, one of the vehicles stalled. It happened in the narrowest stretch, smoke choking visibility down to a few feet. The engine coughed once and went dead. Heat slammed into us immediately, close enough that I could hear metal ticking and popping as it expanded. Flames crept through the brush along the shoulder, close enough to reflect in the side mirrors. The driver turned the key again. Nothing. Paint on the hood began to blister, bubbling into small black patches. Someone shouted that the fuel line was heating. Another voice yelled to abandon the truck. I could not tell who said what. All I could hear was the fire, rushing closer, impatient. Start it, I shouted, knowing pressure would not help but having nothing else to give. Start it now. The driver slammed the key again. The engine hesitated, whined, then finally caught, roaring like it had been dragged back by force. The truck lurched forward just as flames crossed the road behind it, cutting off the space we had occupied seconds earlier. The window had almost closed on us. We pushed on. Another vehicle nearly tipped when the shoulder gave way beneath it. Ash and loose soil slid like water. Soldiers grabbed the frame, boots digging in, muscles straining, stopping it just short of rolling. No one yelled. No one froze. They moved because that was what they knew how to do. Smoke swallowed everything beyond arm's length. People became outlines, then voices, then hands reaching through gray air. Breathing burned. Every inhale tasted like ash and melted plastic. Eyes watered constantly. You wiped them, and they filled again. At one point, I could not see one of my soldiers. I called his name once, then again, louder. No answer. The fear that hit me then hollowed me out more than the fire ever could. My mind raced ahead before I could stop it. Injury. Disorientation. Collapse. The weight of having to report it. The weight of knowing a decision I made might have ended with someone not coming home. Then a shade broke through the smoke, coughing hard, helmet streaked black, eyes wide but focused. He raised a hand without speaking. Alive. The relief hit so hard my vision blurred for a second. I nodded once, sharp, letting him know I had him, then forced myself to keep moving. There was no time to linger in it. We moved people out one by one, civilians first. Then our own. Someone stumbled and went down. Two others hauled them up without breaking stride. Another responder froze in place, overwhelmed, and had to be physically turned and pushed forward. No one stopped long enough to think about how bad it was getting. There was no sense of heroism in any of it. No feeling of control. We felt small. Exposed. Like we were borrowing time from something much larger that could take it back whenever it wanted. When we finally cleared the immediate danger zone, there was no rush of relief, just exhaustion settling in layers. Muscles shaking, hands unsteady. Breathing loud inside my helmet. We stood there, close together, counting heads again and again, making sure no one was missing. Fire roared behind us, closing over the road we had just escaped. In that moment, nothing else mattered. We got everyone out, not clean, not smooth, not the way the manuals describe success. We got them out because there was no other option left. One civilian did not make it. A man in his early 50s, a volunteer who had pushed himself past what his body could handle. The medic worked on him in the back of the vehicle while we moved, hand steady, voice calm, doing everything right. His heart gave out anyway. He was gone before we reached the medical point. The confirmation came quietly, no announcement, just a look from the medic and a slight shake of his head. The loss settled over us immediately, heavy and final. No one swore, no one looked away. There was no space for denial. He had been alive when we reached him. He had been talking. Then he was not. That is how fast things can turn, and there is nothing dramatic or fair about it. There was no celebration waiting for us. No relief that felt clean. We stood in the gray light before dawn, smoke thinning just enough to show what was left behind. Blackened ground, melted signs. Trees reduced to burned poles. The stretch of road where we had pulled them out was now fully consumed. If we had arrived minutes later, there would have been more bodies. That thought did not bring comfort. It only sharpened the loss. The civilians we rescued sat wrapped in blankets, faces streaked with soot, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Some thanked us quietly. Some stared straight ahead, still trying to understand how close they had come. One woman kept asking about the man who did not make it. At first, no one answered her. Eventually, a medic sat beside her and spoke softly. I did not hear the words. I did not need to. My soldiers moved the way people do after something irreversible. Calm on the surface, tight underneath. They helped where they could, then stepped back when professionals took over. No one talked about what we had done. No one needed to. We all understood the same thing. Doing the right thing does not guarantee everyone survives. Higher command arrived before dawn. Their vehicles were clean. Their uniforms were pressed. They stepped out into a scene that still smelled like smoke and burned plastic, their boots untouched by ash. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Formal. Controlled. Questions came fast and sharp. Timelines. Locations. Who authorized what and when? I was called forward. I stood at attention, helmet under my arm, uniform stiff with soot and sweat. I did not try to wipe it off. I answered every question directly. I said I had moved my unit without authorization due to an immediate threat to civilian life. I described the silence on the radios, the fire behavior, the trapped crew. I acknowledged the fatality and said his name out loud when they asked. One officer, uniform still spotless, asked if I understood that I had disobeyed a lawful order. I said yes. He asked if I would make the same decision again, knowing the outcome included a death. I did not answer right away. I thought about the road now swallowed by fire, about the people sitting alive behind me, about the man who did not make it. Then I said yes. The words did not shake. The days after blurred together in a quieter way. No fire, no smoke, just rooms with closed doors, and voices kept low. Statements were taken, timelines reconstructed. Maps spread across tables that showed where things were supposed to be, not where they actually had been. I was temporarily relieved of command while the review ran its course. It was done professionally, without judgment in the words, but the meaning was clear. The system had to examine itself, and I was part of that examination. My soldiers were reassigned to another officer. I watched it happen from a distance, careful not to interfere. Rank does not disappear when command does, but your place changes. People stop coming to you first. Conversations pause when you enter a room, not out of disrespect, out of uncertainty. No one knows what to say when an outcome is still being decided. Some officers avoided me altogether. Others nodded once when we passed, a small acknowledgement that said more than any conversation could. No one said I was right. No one said I was wrong. They waited for paperwork to tell them what to think. The soldiers from that night stayed in touch. Quiet messages, short calls. No one talked about the fire directly. They talked about home. About a football season starting back in Iowa. about a truck that still needed fixing in a garage in Michigan. Ordinary things. I understood why. That night was already lodged deep enough in all of us. We did not need to pull it back out to prove it was there. The investigation moved slowly. It always does. I answered the same questions more than once. Why I moved. When I moved. Whether I understood the order. Whether I understood the risk. I told the truth every time. The facts did not change. The silence on the radios. The fire behavior. The trapped crew. The narrowing window. If I sounded calm, it was because the decision itself had been calm. The chaos came later. At night, when everything was quiet, the doubts came anyway. Not about moving. About timing. About whether there was something I missed. Some small adjustment that could have changed the outcome for the man who died. Those thoughts do not care about investigations or conclusions. They arrive on their own schedule and sit with you whether you invite them or not. When the review finally concluded, there were findings and notes and carefully worded language. I was formally reprimanded for disobeying a lawful order. The language acknowledged the circumstances. It acknowledged the lives saved. It also made it clear that procedures exist for a reason. The system protected itself, as it always does. I accepted it without argument. What stayed with me was not the reprimand or the career impact. It was the quiet certainty that settled in after everything else had passed. I had learned the difference between following orders and exercising command. Between legality and responsibility. Between doing what keeps you safe and doing what lets you live with yourself afterward. That lesson did not fade when the paperwork was filed away. It stayed with me in every decision that came after, shaping how I listened, how I hesitated, how I chose. Some experiences leave scars, others leave clarity. That one left both. I still think about that hillside when the wind changes or when smoke hangs low in the air longer than it should. I remember the weight of the radio in my hand and the silence behind me as my soldiers waited. No one rushed me. No one tried to read my face. They trusted that whatever I decided, I would carry it all the way through. Command is not about never breaking rules. It is about understanding why the rules exist in the first place. Some are written to protect lives when everything is moving too fast. Others are written to protect systems, careers, and chains of authority. Most of the time, those things line up. Sometimes they do not. When they pull apart, someone still has to choose, and that choice does not come with clean outcomes. I paid a price for that decision. It followed me into evaluations, quiet meetings, and moments when my name carried a pause before it. It slowed things down. It changed how some people saw me. None of that surprised me. Authority always demands accountability, especially when you step outside its lines. What stayed with me more than the consequences was the clarity. That night stripped everything down to its simplest form. People were running out of time. I had the ability to act. I acted. I acted. One life was still lost, and that loss matters. It will always matter. But others went home who would not have if we had waited. That night did not make me a hero. It did not make me proud. It made me honest with myself about what I am willing to live with and what I am not. If you want to hear more honest stories like this, subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.